I remember the exact moment everything shifted, the second the room went quiet, the second the glass slipped from her hand, the second my son looked at me like I was no longer his mother. "You're being selfish." I didn't recognize his voice when he said it. And before I could even process those words, the wine hit my face. I never thought my life would come down to a moment like that. Standing in my own dining room, soaked in red wine, staring at the two people I had given everything to, wondering when I became the villain in their story. But to understand that night, you need to understand who we were before it. My son, Daniel, used to be the kind of boy who held my hand in public even when he was 12. The kind who would leave little notes on the kitchen counter that said, "Don't skip breakfast, Mom." After his father passed away, it was just the two of us for a long time. We didn't just survive, we built something strong, something unbreakable. Or at least, that's what I believed. When Daniel introduced me to his wife, Clara, I tried my best to welcome her like a daughter. She was elegant, poised, always dressed like she was stepping into a magazine shoot. At first, I admired that about her. She brought a kind of polish into Daniel's life that I thought he deserved. But there were moments, small, almost invisible at the time, that I brushed aside. The way she would correct him mid-sentence, the way she'd smile at me, but her eyes would drift away before I finished speaking. The way she always asked about my finances but never about my health. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, love requires trust, doesn't it? And I trusted Daniel completely. So when they suggested moving into my house, temporarily, while they sorted out their finances, I didn't hesitate. "This house is yours too," I told him. And I meant it. At first, it felt like a blessing. The house was full again. Laughter, footsteps, conversations drifting through the halls. I cooked dinners like I used to when Daniel was younger. Clara would sit across from me, sipping her wine, complimenting the food with that soft, practiced voice of hers. "You're so lucky to have a mother like her," she would say to Daniel, and he would nod, smiling. But something was changing, slowly, quietly. At first, it was little things. Clara rearranged the kitchen without asking. She said it was more efficient. My favorite cups disappeared into cabinets I couldn't reach. Then the living room changed. The old sofa I had picked with my husband was suddenly outdated. They replaced it with something sleek and cold. "It's time for a fresh start," Clara told me. I laughed it off. I told myself it didn't matter. Things change. But then, I started noticing how often decisions were made without me. Bills being redirected. Documents being discussed in hushed tones. Daniel, who used to tell me everything, began saying things like, "It's just easier this way, Mom." Easier for who? I wanted to ask, but I didn't. Because every time I felt that question rise in my chest, I pushed it back down. Love makes you do that. It convinces you silence is kindness. One evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to listen, I was just walking past. But my name stopped me. "'Cause she doesn't need all this space," Clara said softly. "It's her house," Daniel replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "For now," Clara added. There was a pause. A long one. I stood there in the hallway, my heart beating louder than their whispers. For now? I should have walked in right then. I should have asked what she meant. But instead, I kept walking. I told myself I misunderstood. That's what I kept doing, misunderstanding things that, deep down, I already understood perfectly. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly the house stopped feeling like mine. Clara started hosting dinners, her friends, her colleagues, people who looked at me like I was temporary, like I was a guest in my own home. "Why don't you rest upstairs?" she would suggest sweetly. "We'll handle everything down here." Handle everything. That phrase began to echo in my mind. Daniel changed too. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough that I felt it. He stopped asking how my day was. Stopped sitting with me in the evenings. Stopped noticing when I grew quiet. One night, I tried to bring it up. "Are you happy, Daniel?" I asked. He looked surprised. "Of course I am." "Why wouldn't I be?" "I don't know," I said gently. "You just seem distant." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, please don't do this." "Do what?" "Make things complicated." Complicated. I swallowed my words after that. Because I didn't want to be the problem. I didn't want to be the reason my son looked at me with frustration instead of love. So I adjusted. I stayed out of the way. I told myself this was just a phase, that families change, evolve, grow apart a little, and then find their way back until the night everything finally cracked. It was Clara's idea to have a family dinner. Just the three of us. She cooked. That alone felt unusual. The table was set beautifully. Candles, polished glasses, everything perfectly arranged. Too perfectly. I remember feeling uneasy, but I smiled anyway, because that's what I always did. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Small talk, polite laughter, the clinking of cutlery against plates. But beneath it there was something else, a tension I couldn't quite name. Clara kept exchanging glances with Daniel. Silent conversations. Then halfway through the meal, Clara set her fork down. "We need to talk," she said. My stomach tightened. Daniel didn't look at me. "What about?" I asked carefully. Clara folded her hands on the table. "About the house." There it was. That word again. I felt my fingers curl slightly around my glass. "What about it?" Daniel finally spoke, but his voice felt distant, rehearsed. "We've been thinking it might be time to make some changes." "Changes?" I repeated, Clara leaned forward, her expression calm, almost sympathetic. "It's just not practical for things to stay the way they are." The way they are. My home, my life. "I don't understand," I said. Daniel exhaled, clearly uncomfortable. "Mom, you don't really need this much space anymore." The words landed heavier than I expected. "I've lived here for 30 years, I said quietly. "And we're grateful for that," Clara replied quickly. "Truly. But it's time to think about the future." Something inside me shifted. A slow, creeping realization. This wasn't a conversation. This was a decision. And I hadn't been part of it. I looked at Daniel, searching for something familiar in his face. Something that told me this wasn't what it sounded like. "Daniel," I said softly, "what are you saying?" He hesitated. Just for a second, but in that second, I saw it. Doubt, guilt, and something worse. Distance. "You're being selfish," he said. And just like that, everything I thought we had began to fracture. I felt the words before I understood them. Felt them settle into my chest like something cold and permanent. Selfish? After everything? I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, Clara let out a sharp laugh. Not loud, not dramatic. Just enough to sting. "Oh, please," she said, reaching for her glass of wine. And that's when her hand moved, and the glass tilted. And in the next heartbeat, I realized something irreversible was about to happen. The wine hit my face before I could even blink. It was cold at first, then sticky, then humiliating. For a moment, no one moved. Not me, not Daniel, not even Clara. The only sound in the room was the faint drip of red wine sliding from my chin onto the tablecloth I had bought years ago, back when this house still felt like a home. I didn't wipe it away. I just stood there, frozen, trying to understand how everything had collapsed so quickly. "I'm so sorry," Clara said, but there was no urgency in her voice. No panic, no real regret. It didn't feel like an accident. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not broken, not shattered, just still. Daniel stood up halfway, his chair scraping against the floor. "Clara, what the hell?" "It slipped," she interrupted smoothly, already reaching for a napkin, but not to help me, just to dab at the table, as if the mess mattered more than the person it had landed on. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I waited for him to come to me, to grab a towel, to say something, anything, that sounded like the boy who used to leave me. Notes on the kitchen counter. But he didn't move. He just stood there, caught somewhere between discomfort and silence. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I reached for the edge of the table, steadying myself, not because I was weak, but because I needed something solid to hold on to. "Excuse me," I said quietly. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. I turned and walked out of the dining room. Each step felt measured, controlled, like if I rushed, I might fall apart, and I refused to let that happen where they could see it. Upstairs in the bathroom, I closed the door behind me and finally looked at myself in the mirror. Red streaks stained my face, my blouse, even my hair. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked smaller, not physically, but somehow diminished. And then the thoughts came. Not loud, not chaotic, just clear. You're being selfish. The words echoed again, but this time they didn't hurt the same way. This time, they made me think. Selfish. For giving my son a home when he needed one? For opening my doors without conditions? For trusting that love would be enough to hold us together? I grabbed a towel and slowly wiped the wine from my skin. The fabric turned pink, then red. And with every motion, something inside me began to shift. Not anger. Not yet. Clarity. I walked into my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands rested in my lap, still faintly trembling, not from fear, but from realization. The signs had been there. The whispers. The decisions made without me. The quiet way I had been moved to the edges of my own life. And I had let it happen. Because I loved him. Because I believed that love meant patience. But patience, I realized in that moment, is not the same as surrender. Downstairs, I could hear faint voices. Clara's calm and controlled. Daniel's lower, uncertain. They were talking about me. I didn't need to hear the words to know that. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. There were 100 things I could do. I could go back downstairs and demand an explanation. I could cry, plead, remind Daniel of everything we had been to each other. But something told me that wouldn't change anything. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a shift in power, and I had been the last to notice. I unlocked my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at a name I hadn't thought about in months. Mr. Rahman, my lawyer, a quiet, meticulous man who had helped me years ago after my husband passed, when paperwork and legal matters felt too heavy to carry alone. Stared at his name, then slowly. I started typing. Hello, Mr. Rahman. I hope you're well. I need to discuss something urgent regarding my house. Please let me know when you're available. I read the message twice. Not emotional, not reactive, just clear. Then I pressed send. The moment I did, something inside me settled. Not relief, but control. For the first time in months. I felt like I was standing on my own feet again. There was a knock on my door. Soft, careful. Mom? Daniel's voice. I didn't answer right away. I looked around the room. The same room I had slept in for decades. The same walls that had witnessed birthdays, grief, laughter, and now this. Another knock. Mom, can we talk? I stood up slowly and walked to the door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there, his expression uneasy. Not angry, not cold, just conflicted. Behind him, down the hallway, I could see Clara standing near the stairs, watching. Always watching. I didn't mean what I said, Daniel began quickly. Things just got tense. I studied his face. You said exactly what you meant, I replied calmly. He flinched. That's not fair, he said. A small, almost invisible smile touched my lips, but it didn't reach my eyes. No, I said softly. What's not fair is everything that's been happening in this house. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let him sit in it. I think, I continued, my voice steady, we all need some space. Space? He repeated. Yes. I could see the confusion forming in his eyes. Because this wasn't the response he expected. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't begging. And that unsettled him more than anything else. We'll talk tomorrow, I added. Then gently, I closed the door. Not slammed, not forced. Just closed. And as I stood there alone in my room, I heard their footsteps retreat down the hallway. Whispers again. Always whispers. But this time, they didn't matter. Because for the first time, I wasn't listening anymore.